And now let's talk about Latvia. And with us, we have a very special guest, Latvian ambassador to Poland, Juris Poikans. Sir, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
Now, Mr. Ambassador, I think it goes without saying there's a very unique relationship between the Baltic states, Latvia, Poland, this region. They seem to come together, especially now facing what's happening in Ukraine. You've also spent time in Ukraine. You were serving there for your country. Tell us a little bit about how that's developed over these last now 2 years, that cooperation, especially with Latvia, the Baltic states, and Poland in the mix.
You're absolutely correct. Baltic-Polish relations currently are very, very close, and they were close during the work of the last government. They are very close today. And when we look specifically at Latvian-Polish relations, we don't have any historical difficulties, for example, unlike other neighbors, and I think it creates a very good foundation. Maybe you know that Marshalik Pilsudski helped us to liberate the eastern part of Latvia. So also this positive historical foundation is very important. I think the region has come together much more than before. You see that Sweden and Finland have joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You see that the new government is heavily investing also in developing ties with the Nordic Baltic area. We are united by the Baltic Sea, number one. So this is our joint region. That's why we care about it. And at the same time, we share the same vision when it comes to the Russian aggression on Ukraine. We understand it's not only the Ukrainian fight for independence, territorial integrity, but it's also, in a way, the Ukrainian fight for the future of Europe. And given our, unfortunately, tragic history with our eastern neighbor, so we probably understand a bit better, let's say, those challenges currently Ukraine is facing. That's why, obviously, Latvia and Poland nowadays are friends and allies.
That's right, and we're all facing the same challenge. We have to be secured to face, well, hopefully not, but maybe if the time comes, we have to feel safe and secured. Now, do you believe that other countries, other Baltic countries, are doing enough to feel secure? And we know, and we are going to talk about Latvia, small country, but is doing a lot to help Ukraine and to secure our region. But what about other countries? Are we doing enough?
I think when it comes to the Baltic states, obviously, we are sharing very much the same positions. And I would say we are having the same level of support to Ukraine. I don't have any doubts when it comes specifically to Baltic, Nordic countries and also Poland. As we know, the European Union and NATO, these institutions consist of many different countries. And obviously, geography and some historical considerations plays a role. Yes, we are all allies, but some are a bit closer allies, let's say. So as a result, I would say we are doing quite a lot, but probably this is not enough. And at the same time, we see that this might be the decisive year in the history of Ukraine. We see they are lacking armaments. As a result, we are having difficulties within the Ukrainian government. As a result, if you don't have a success. So we are largely now speaking about how to keep the front line in order not to collapse it. So as a result, yes, we are doing quite a lot, all of us, but we must do definitely more, because at the end of the day, what I mentioned, what we have at stake is the future of Europe. So as a result, we must ensure that Ukraine at the end of the day wins this war.
I like that, Mr. Best, when you said you have this shared vision very much that unites the Baltic states, that unites also here very much Poland as well. But at the same time, I mean, it goes without saying, I mean, if we're looking at that drone coalition that Latvia is leading, hundreds of drones that are going to be dispatched to Ukraine, also other security. I mean, the Baltic states keep on giving without any, let's say, any pause. If there's a need, they will continue to do that. But then if you observe diplomatically this whole vision, as you've put it.
Yes.
And you said it's about the future of Europe, but that doesn't seem to be shared by certain countries as we look more into Central Europe. We've just had those presidential elections, Slovakia. That's a different vision for Europe. So how does that, let's say, crash on policy if we look at that? Does that damage the case here for unity? Is there something maybe breaking apart if we look for further support for Ukraine?
If we look at the European Union and Europe in general, it has always been about regions, in a way. Let's say Baltic and Nordic countries share the same geography, but at the same time, for example, we are having always meetings before foreign affairs councils, for example, so we are very closely tied. Poland and Germany are a part of the same region. So it's not a big tragedy if, let's say, not all the countries of the European Union share, let's say, the same understanding, because, yes, there are geopolitical considerations. Let's put it honestly, the southern border of Poland is in a way some kind of civilizational border, which historically has emerged emerged. So you have Czech Republic and Slovakia over the mountains, and obviously these countries probably do not share the same perspectives. They have a bit different history, and we know it historically, for example, Austria and Russia were pretty close in the 18th century, for example. So there are many arguments which are there. I'm completely sure there is understanding about the importance of this aggression for the future of the European Union, but probably we will never achieve the same level of understanding. And maybe we don't even need to do it. Yes, there are countries which are more engaged, and we will keep this issue, let's say, on the agenda of the European Union. We will, as you remember, when we had, I would say, not a fight, but we had arguments with the Hungarian Prime Minister at the end of the day. So we all invested in convincing him. Okay, he left the decision hall at the same time, but we had a decision at the same time. So we will need to work much more on that.
But is it fair though? Because if something happens and Russia, let's say, God forbid, but Ukraine loses and Russia is approaching, I mean, is it fair that one country is doing more than the other? But at the end of the day, we all want to be safe, and we do not want Russians in any of the.
I agree. You see the whole debate, for example, also about the new Secretary General of NATO. For example, there are currently 2 at least nominated, and both of them, Romania and Netherlands, spend less than 2%. And let's say the representatives of these countries. Look, but this is a question we cannot. These are sovereign states, so you might have different opinions. So it's extremely difficult to push, let's say, to act them in a bit different way. I see that we have here a coalition. So you rightly pointed out, we have the drone coalition. We have a very good Czech initiative on shells. So we have countries like Portugal, Netherlands, Germany joining. So as I mentioned, it's extremely difficult to expect the same feelings, because I remember once I spoke with the former president of Estonia, Toomas Hendrik Ilves, who told me, what is good about visiting Poland? You don't need to talk about the history, because this is the same understanding. And you go to different countries, you spend maybe half of the debate what happened in 1940 or in 1945. So we have this understanding, we have this geographical closeness. If you look, for example, at Finland and Sweden, that's why we are more concerned. You're absolutely right. Obviously, we are one alliance, but it's always like that. There are not so many countries within the European Union who have a really global geopolitical clout at the end of the day. So you largely focus, unfortunately, on your region.
Yeah. I also want to touch on what you've just said. It's something in common. I think your Prime Minister, Mr. said this as Denis Šmihal was touring the Baltic states and all the capitals last week. Very much, as you said, the Latvian society supports Ukraine because we see ourselves in it. We remember the struggle against the Soviet Empire. Now, on that basis, I want to jump on something else, because the unity is there. We've touched on. There's no doubt there is that unity. But at the same time, I do want to ask about certain, let's say, friction points, which seem to have also developed out of Latvia and potentially out of Estonia, and particularly with, I think it was a few months ago, Ms. Ždanoka, the MEP from Latvia, and also I think before that, when we were in Riga some time ago, I think it was now 2 years ago, another Russian local Latvian member of parliament who denied Soviet occupation ever took place. And I think she was, since then, there's been criminal investigations. But how much of a danger is that, and how much of an influence do these people have in Latvian politics?
Let's start with number one. Latvia has always been the most ethnically diverse country. Let's say if we compare with Lithuania and Estonia, even before the Second World War, the number of minorities was around 25%. It was more than in Estonia and Lithuania. So Latvia is, in a way, gateway to the Baltics. So as a result, the Soviet Empire always paid more attention in a way. If you control in a way Latvia, obviously you control also Estonia and Lithuania. As a result, they settled, for example, former Soviet officers, people stayed there. If I'm correct, in 1989, out of 8 largest Latvian towns, the majority of the population were not Latvians. In 8 largest towns, Riga, Daugavpils, Liepaja, Jelgava, I'm coming myself from Jelgava, where the ethnic situation was very mixed. But let's say these Russians are very, very different. You have people who have come, for example, those who were fleeing, let's say, the religious persecution at the end of the 17th century, so-called old believers, for example. There is one group which settled there. So you have people living in the eastern part of Latvia, traditionally. In a way, there were always much more Russians and Jews, let's say, if you compare with other provinces. So you have people who have arrived after 1945, who didn't have any historical connection. So you are absolutely right. There are, I would say, wide divergence of opinions and views. There are people probably who are not sharing, let's say, the same ideals of the independence of Latvia. I'm not surprised about it, because you cannot expect, let's say, unanimity again among those people.
But isn't that exactly what Vladimir Putin is counting on, to exploit those kind of weaknesses?
You know, we have done a lot to strengthen our society, and nowadays, when you look, let's say, at the political representation of ethnic Russians, let's say, in the Latvian parliament, it has gone down in comparison, for example, with the previous elections. You will not see, maybe except the union of the Russians of Latvia, you will not see, let's say, any anti-Ukrainian statements even among those political parties who are supported, for example, by ethnic Russians. So I would say yes, you have a diversity of opinions, but we are quite sure that we are living in this society for centuries in general. Yes, there are more Russians who came after the occupation, but we have never had any ethnic problems or difficulties. And let's say if and our fight for independence at the end of the 80s, obviously it was very difficult because we had the largest, let's say, number of minorities, and many of people were afraid. And even at that time, we didn't encounter any serious difficulties. So, look, and also those Russians living in Latvia, obviously they take something from Latvians, like Russians living in Uzbekistan take something from Uzbekistan. We are pretty cool-headed, calm, so obviously it's some kind of exchange of, let's say, mentalities of what's going on.
Now, let me ask you about cooperation with Russia, because before the war started, Latvia cooperated, traded with Russia, and just import rate constituted last year 1.6%, export 3.1%. Quite significant numbers. Yes. What about now? How does that look?
Look, it seems significant, but if you, let's say, compare with the beginning of the 90s, it's very negligible in a way. We had, let's say, Russians were always number 1 or 2 in terms of tourism, and we don't have them anymore. If you look also at Latvian ports are always working on Russia and partly on Belarus. It was more Lithuania which was cooperating with Belarus. Now you see again these cargoes going down. But if you have, let's say, around 30% of ethnic Russians, obviously they have some links there. You have companies which have partners, let's say, historical ones. Nowadays, for example, our pharmaceutical companies are trading with Russia, saying that this is not the product which is included in the sanctions list. Obviously, these links cannot disappear overnight, and they exist. But in general, if you look at this percentage, I think our trade with Poland currently is bigger than our trade with Russia.
So there is a change, and although, as we said, decoupling takes some time, but again, it's also, I think, ironic to see still those ethnic Russians there. You still, I think, around 20% of your population.
Yes,
Russian
a bit
speakers.
more even.
But at the same time, the most ardent supporters of Ukraine, of Baltic security, NATO, and it's a fascinating
new generation
thing.
is probably coming as well, right?
Absolutely,
so
absolutely. People are used to live in independent Latvia. We have a lot of, let's say, sportsmen who are competing for the Latvian team. Our best tennis player, Alyona Ostapenko, I believe, is of Ukrainian origin, who speaks excellent Latvian. So you have football players, basketball players, hockey players. So people are a part of society.
Right. Well, we continue to need more of Latvia and the Baltic states as we continue to help Ukraine. We thank you so much for your insights here. That was the Latvian ambassador, Mr. Juris Poikans. Thank you so much.